SVC Media.
Welcome to the iGaming Daily podcast, analysing the news from the betting and gaming industry all over the globe, supported by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market.
This week, gambling social media exploded because of all things, Skee-Ball. Just about everyone on Twitter had a hot take about an announcement from arcade venue Dave & Buster's that it would be working with Lucre to develop a skill game-based option in its app for customers to compete on its games with real money on the line. And while people were heating up online, the commentary from Fanatics and DraftKings as it relates to the court case of Mike Hermalyn got even more fiery. I'm going to put on my fire gear and we're going to try to handle the heat on today's episode of iGaming Daily. iGaming Daily is presented by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market. 56% of the EGR Power 50 personalized player experiences with Optimove. You can join that group. Just a reminder, we still have that special offer of a first free month if you click the link in the description below. I am Jessica Welman, editor of SVC Americas, joined by my media manager, Charlie Horner. Charlie, we joke that I love asking you about American things. I pinged Charlie before this. I'm so excited to hear the answer to this one. What do you know about Dave and Buster's?
So yeah, this is a fun one. I obviously had to Google Dave and Buster's when this story broke. Prior to this, I had no knowledge of Dave and Buster's existence. Yeah, look like very interesting venues. The best way I can put it to maybe a UK audience is think Blackpool arcade venues, and then add in a sports bar in there. Yeah, interesting.
That's basically it. You know what's funny is in the States, if somebody doesn't know Dave & Buster's, we tend to say it's an adult version of Chuck E. Cheese. And this was kind of when I learned that you guys have no idea what Chuck E. Cheese is either.
Well, actually, yeah, I'd heard the name and just assumed that it was this just American thing. Apparently, there are 10 Chuck E. Cheeses in the UK. I couldn't tell you where they are, but apparently there are.
I mean, I gotta tell you, there's, again, this is nostalgia talking, but I loved a Chuck E. Cheese back in the day. Mostly because you had the games, the little arcade games that you could play for tickets and stuff. The animatronic robot band of animals on the stage is the best part, because I actually don't think the tech on that has changed since I was 4 or 5 years old. So it's just very rickety robots shaking and moving. Anyways, yeah, we go on about Chuck E. Cheese forever, but we're going to pivot back to Dave & Buster's. Okay, so now that you kind of know what it is, once you heard the idea that, so you can go to Dave & Buster's, you can log on your app and maybe challenge your friend to $5 playing the Pop-A-Shot game or playing Dance Dance Revolution or Skee-Ball or whatever. Did this strike you as something that was just real out of left field and real out of line?
Probably, yeah. I mean, I understand why it's caused a bit of a stir on social media, as I can gather it has done over the last few days. I mean, this whole social gaming sort of vertical has been in the headlines recently, and I think there's a lot of critics of that. But I mean, from a practical point of view, I would say if I wanted to have a bet with you, Jess, for Skee-Ball, I don't really understand why I need to do that in app. Can I not just say, "Hey Jess, here's $10 so that I can beat you at basketball"?
Yeah, no, listen. Do I think that this is an idea that will appeal to people? No. Granted, I am a Luddite and very much a Gen Xer that I want as few apps on my phone as humanly possible. So the idea of opening and funding an app for a Dave & Buster's, which I go inside once every 3 years, maybe, No, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to say $5 on who does better at Skee-Ball. I think the bigger thing that came out of this debate that I find interesting is people kind of freaking out about what regulators are going to say and whether it's legal or not. So you mentioned this vertical is under a bit of attack. So this vertical is specifically considered skill games. And skill games, it's very murky. So last summer, I think it was, we did a really good webinar at SBC on skill games with Jeff Ifra and Lindsay Slater of GeoComply and the CEO of Skills that talks about some of the lack of legal clarity because the terminology around what is a game of skill varies state to state. So this is, again, a very state-by-state thing. But generally, there is this carve-out in most states that allows for things like chess tournaments for money, bowling leagues, trivia competitions, golf tournaments, basketball tournaments for money, where you can compete for things with a cash prize and an entry fee because the predominant factor that determines who is going to win is who's the best basketball player, who's the best bowler, et cetera, et cetera. Fantasy sports falls under this skill game carve out as well in many states. It varies. FanDuel Face Off is a product that is rooted in skill games law, where you can play word games and little arcade games featuring like Rob Gronkowski, and it's available in 31 states plus DC. So I will say if Flutter is willing to be in this space and be in it loudly, trumpeting partnerships with Gronk, I do think you probably have a decent legal letter from a lawyer telling you that you're in decent shape if you get a challenge to this. Charlie, questions on that? Because I know it is kind of confusing.
Yeah, I guess Dave and Buster's, or the company behind Dave and Buster's, they're also publicly listed, if I'm right. So I guess they've probably had some sort of sign off from their compliance or legal department, or whether this is fine. One question I did have really about the concept of Dave and Buster's is how many of these are there in the US, and what states are we talking about? Are they dotted around everywhere, or is this a very sort of concentrated
I think it's
location?
A pretty, again, it gives you an idea of kind of where it lives in American headspace. I feel like they're in most major cities. Like in Lexington, we don't have a Dave and Buster's, but we have one of their competitors called Main Event. So I think it's pretty national. Mm-hmm. It's not like McDonald's. It's not like there's several in every city. You really have to get to a certain population level before you see Dave and Buster's kind of crop up, if that makes sense.
Sure.
I will say too, what's interesting is usually in these press releases, there's a sentence that is pending regulatory and legal approval. And that sentence isn't in here. There are states that they're not going to be allowed to do this. Florida, for example, has, a very specific law that says it is unlawful to bet on the result of a contest of skill. Mm-hmm. Ohio, I have learned recently, the OCCC, the regulator there, is apparently questioning whether this is legal. And I was like, well, who cares if they think it's legal? It's not regulated in most of these states. Turns out that games of skill and amusement are in fact regulated by the OCCC. That is given their jurisdiction. In Georgia, the Georgia Lottery looks at COAMs, coin-operated amusement machines. So there are a couple jurisdictions where there actually is some explicit kind of regulation over these things. In most states, if anybody were to challenge this, it would need to be the Attorney General, because it's not like there's a regulator that they're failing to report to.
Yeah, and I guess at the start we mentioned that Dave & Buster's sort of arcade amusement games type location, maybe a little bit more grown up than Chuck E. Cheese is. But are there sort of minors that attend these places, and could there be some sort of maybe not legal arguments, but definitely sort of moral questions over this?
So they are age gating it to 18 and up on the app if you want to participate in this. My understanding was because, and again, this may vary state by state, the ones that I've been to, you get carded at the door because there's alcohol, but that, again, it might be state liquor laws and these sorts of things. There's a couple of other chains like this. There's one called GameWorks, for example, and I've seen kids running around in a GameWorks. It's been so long since I've been in a Dave & Buster's that I can't remember if there are kids in it or not. I guess I should have done this research. Sorry, producers. But, you know, they are putting 18 and up on it. And that might be a legal situation too, that they have to in certain states. But also it's just like, I have this argument with people sometimes, these unregulated verticals. They're like, well, if it's not gambling and it's okay, why is it 18 and up? And I'm just like, I don't know, because maybe it's just a better look for it to be 18 and up. Why is Chick-fil-A closed on Sundays? Because the owners are religious. Like, sometimes you just make business decisions that you want to optically be seen a certain way. Like, you know, generally you don't want minors getting involved with money, like on anything, shopping, your phone apps. That's why most people's phone apps are set up so that kids, you can limit and make sure that they're not, you know, blowing up your credit card without your permission. I don't really think it's like some, you know, smoking gun of like, see, it's really gambling after all. But that's just
Yeah, I don't necessarily think the modus operandi of a business should be, let's go to the extreme limits of the law and see how far we can push it, and if we can avoid sort of getting into trouble, then brilliant. I think there's probably a clearer line that should be defined, especially when it comes to children.
And if you go read the recap of that webinar, the whole point is, you understand you're in a somewhat legally tenuous situation, so you do your best to de-risk your product, and you implement KYC and compliance and that sort of thing, so that when somebody does question you, you're like, look, we volunteer to do all of these things. All right. While you guys practice your Skee-Ball skills, check out that webinar recap, we're going to take a quick break. I need to pause before we dive into what has become my favorite story of 2024, the saga of Mike Hermalyn.
SBC Leaders connects the gambling industry's top-tier operators and associations to share the best ideas, collaborate on solving the biggest issues, and push innovation throughout the betting and gaming industry. If you're an operator and want to join the discussion, visit sbcleaders.com for more information.
Welcome back to iGaming Daily. When I say that the court case of Mike Hermalyn is far and away the most interesting court case I have ever been involved in reporting on, I couldn't even think of what comes in second. Charlie, you don't, follow the news day to day necessarily. How closely are you following the case of the former DraftKings employee who defected to Fanatics?
So, funnily enough, I think it was one of the... I think you might have been away earlier in the year, and we actually did a podcast on this topic because it was quite interesting. I thought, well, let's pick it up and take a look. And I just thought, well, this is quite interesting, fine, good story. We covered it for one episode, and I thought, that'll be that. We'll get a judgment, and we'll all sort of move on to the next story. This has been brilliant. This has been absolutely
it's like a
fantastic.
soap opera.
Yeah, we do this all the time. I used to do this all the time, and you probably still do. Is just looking at these court cases and seeing what's moving through the courts in terms of gaming, and a lot of them are quite dry. This one's anything but.
Yeah. I opened up. So this week, we got the response from the judge on the request of DraftKings to grant a preliminary injunction against Hermalyn before the case comes to its natural conclusion. And when I opened it up and saw 60 pages, usually this is where I like heave a sigh, I make a new cup of coffee, and I just like get ready and arm myself. I saw 60 pages and I rubbed my hands together. I'm like, maybe I should wait till after work and read it with a glass of wine. Like, it's juicy. And this one was pretty juicy too, because I think if we did a pod on it in February, what happened was since then, DraftKings kind of came around again and they were like, listen, we've done a more thorough kind of diagnostic of what he was doing on his computer. We can tell that he was staying at Fanatics CEO Michael Rubin's house, accessing documents that he would have no business reason to be accessing, downloading them. And there was also this big accusation that he went to kind of his deputies, his number one and number two, and tried to persuade them to come work at Fanatics. And they ended up kind of ratting him out to DraftKings and filing their own sworn affidavits explaining what they said happened, and he denied it. The judge took all of this into consideration and basically said, on consideration of how likely it is DraftKings is going to succeed in this case, she conceded that basically on most fronts, the chance of them winning is pretty reasonable. And I will say, having read it, she sure finds Hermalyn lacking a certain amount of credibility. So yeah, in terms of success on the various fronts, the things that are kind of legally at play here are this non-compete that he signed and how enforceable it is. The elements of this non-compete, you can't go work for a competitor doing the same thing that you were doing. The scope of that was international. She did say, I don't really buy that, DraftKings Sudan is a place, she didn't say Sudan, but she just said, we'll restrict this to the United States. Like, I don't think that you can really restrict him from moving to another country and doing this. That you can't solicit customers or employees, and that you can't bring trade secrets from one company to the next. So she said basically on all of these fronts that this non-compete seems to hold and be reasonable and legally within the law. Quick aside, the Federal Trade Commission recently announced that they are no longer going to let non-competes be legal. There is going to be a legal challenge to this. That announcement doesn't impact this case. It doesn't impact active legislation. So while it's interesting and I think speaks to the larger industry, because I've had to sign many a non-compete in my life, not applicable here. Here's the juicy part. The judge kind of calls Hermalyn out on several things. For example, he was explicitly told by DraftKings, if you are going to move files from an old computer to a new computer, you have to use OneDrive. You cannot use Slack. You cannot Dropbox it, email it to yourself, blah, blah, blah. And yet, when he was caught transferring files from Slack to himself, which is a trick I do all the time, by the way, not about work product necessarily, but if I see something on the computer that I want to get to a text message on my phone, I tend to just Slack it to myself. Like, it's a handy trick. And when he was interviewed about it, he called it part of an ordinary course migration. I'm doing air quotes around this. As he moved to a new computer, which was explicitly not the case. She also is pretty clear that, like, listen, you asked these two people to come work for you. And the smoking gun here is that one of them, Andrew Laracy, in the evening while on the phone with him, applied for the role that he wanted at Fanatics by just putting in his name, phone number, address, and email. Didn't fill out job history, references, didn't upload a resume, nothing. And then Within 12 hours, Fanatics HR had reached out to him and immediately set him up with like 4 interviews with some of the top people in the organization. And she's just like, listen, he's applied to your company before and nobody has given him a call. But in 12 hours, all this is going to happen. Like, I'm hard pressed to believe that this guy didn't say, you need to call him.
Lucky guy. You know, maybe he's just had a drastic improvement in his fortunes.
And maybe just the name. They were like, we got to get him right now. So that's like the juicy court details. And the end result is the injunction has been granted. Mike Hermalyn can still work for Fanatics. However, the previous injunction that was granted was very limited in scope. And now this one is even more expansive in scope. It's basically like, you can't really do what you were doing for DraftKings for Fanatics. Your role needs to be something different. You can't discuss anything you've learned at DraftKings. You cannot talk to these people that you've tried to solicit. You cannot talk to customers that you've tried to solicit until there's a more formal, continuation of this case and a ruling on the enforcement of the non-compete becomes kind of binding.
Another part of the non-compete aspect that we probably should mention as well is that even though Hermalyn moved to California, I believe that regardless, the non-compete clause is still intact despite him being a California resident, and I think he's heading up the LA office at Fanatics now as well.
Yeah, so the paperwork and the filing really does elaborate kind of extensively on why the judge feels Massachusetts is the appropriate venue for this. He moved there the day he accepted the job, which was, February 1st. So she's just, the company is based in Massachusetts. These documents reference, the non-competes reference Massachusetts. And as much as California is a more favorable place for the employee when it comes to non-competes, she's just like, there's not enough. It's something called the Colorado River precedent, and it didn't meet that precedent. So she's very comfortable saying Massachusetts is the venue for this. I would like to close with the most interesting part of this, after reading this juicy thing, was then getting 2 of the most harsh PR statements I've ever gotten in my life. Charlie, do you have a favorite part of either of these?
I mean, they're all 100% of both of the statements are incredible, and I just want to imagine your eyes when you receive those emails into your inbox.
I mean, each of them is 200 words long, first of all, and then it's just you don't see stuff usually with court stuff, especially. You get a whole lot of no comments. You certainly don't get, it's unfortunate that DraftKings' cheap attempt at petty retribution against a former employee who simply wanted to take advantage of a better opportunity for himself and his family will now undoubtedly continue to be used to instill fear and intimidation across DraftKings' entire employee base. Those employees now scared into staying in that toxic culture will be the real losers in the case.
That is incredible.
Operators don't really badmouth each other in general, so the fact that they did that, the Fanatics or the DraftKings statement is a little more just this Hermalyn guy is not. They pulled all of the worst things the judge said. In reaching this conclusion, the court rightly saw through Mr. Hermalyn's lies and deception, noting that evidence suggests that Mr. Hermalyn struggled with candor to the court and described his testimony as not credible, evasive, and at best, highly misleading.
The gloves are well and truly off, and I'm here for it.
I know. I would like to know how good this guy is at his job, because he must be the best VIP person ever, because I can't imagine if this was me that at some point they wouldn't just be like, listen, you got to go work somewhere else now. I don't have the money to pay these legal fees.
I mean, yeah, if anything, Mike Hermalyn has got a little bit of an ego boost.
I mean, especially given that like DraftKings they demoted him. They put him on an improvement plan because of comments, not about his performance as VIP, but more, inappropriate things he'd said to other employees, how he treated peers, that sort of thing. I continue to wait with bated breath for every single update that comes on this. It is the gift that keeps on giving. And we will have all of that on SBC Americas. If it gets even juicier, I might just make Charlie and I talk about it again here. So keep checking out SBC Americas and keep tuning in here for the latest on Mike Hermalyn, the drama, and of course, all the rest of the gambling news across the world.
Thank you for listening to today's iGaming Daily podcast, supported by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market. If you want to find out more about some of the subjects raised today, feel free to explore any of the sites in the SBC News Network or check out the latest edition of the SBC Leaders magazine. Happy reading.